The chamber was vast and silent, save for the hum of holographic projectors and the low murmur of deliberation. Counselors from across the galaxy sat in their opulent seats, debating the fate of Earth. The humans, they argued, were a species of little consequence. Primitive. Chaotic. A resource-rich planet guarded by beings barely out of their technological infancy. It seemed to them an easy conquest. Zarkoth, the war-scarred veteran of the Rythan Empire, rose from his seat at the edge of the assembly. His towering frame, half metal, half flesh, commanded attention. The soft whirring of servos accompanied his movement as he leaned forward, mechanical talons clicking against the polished floor. His voice, though roughened by time and battle, cut through the council's noise like a blade. "Stop this madness," Zarkov growled, his glowing amber eyes scanning the room. "You think humanity is a treasure waiting to be plundered. But I tell you now, they are a storm you are not prepared to face." The murmurs ceased. All eyes turned to him, some curious, others dismissive. A counselor, adorned in ceremonial armor, sneered. "You speak as if these creatures pose a threat. They are disorganized. They war among themselves. Their greatest achievements pale compared to the might of this council. What could they possibly do to us?" Zarkoth stepped forward, his battered exoskeleton creaking under his weight. "You see this," he said, gesturing to his artificial limbs. "These were not given to me by some glorious victory. They are the price of underestimating humanity." The room stilled. Zarkoth's voice dropped, quieter now, but no less commanding. "I was there when the Rythan Empire, in its arrogance, declared war on Earth. We thought them weak, just as you do now. And yet, we suffered the most devastating defeat in our history. I lost my brothers, my home, and nearly my life. All because we failed to understand what humanity truly is." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Humans are not like other species. They are unpredictable, chaotic in ways we cannot comprehend. They are born into adversity, and it shapes them. Adapting is not just a trait for them, it is their nature. And when pushed to the brink, they become something else entirely, relentless." The counselor who had spoken earlier leaned back, skepticism evident on his face. "Perhaps you exaggerate. Surely your defeat was not due to their strength, but your own empire's incompetence." Zarkoth's gaze hardened. "You would think that, wouldn't you? It's easy to dismiss a predator when it looks small and unassuming. But that is your first mistake. Humanity doesn't fight wars to conquer or to expand. They fight for survival. And when survival is at stake, they will sacrifice everything to ensure it. Have you ever faced an enemy that would rather destroy themselves than allow you to claim victory?" "I have." He straightened, towering over the assembly. "Do you know what it feels like to watch your fleet, your unstoppable, invincible fleet, burn to ash because a so-called primitive species learned to outthink you? They don't fight on your terms. They make their own rules. They turn your strengths into weaknesses. And they never, ever surrender." A low murmur swept through the chamber, but Zarkoth wasn't finished. His voice rose, sharp and unyielding. "You don't fight humans. You survive them, if you're lucky." The counselors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even the skeptical ones couldn't entirely ignore the weight of his words. Zarkoth exhaled deeply, his tone softening. "I was young when the Rythan Empire made its mistake. I thought as you do now, that our technology and numbers would crush them. I believed we were invincible. And then I watched as their fire consumed us. Cities we thought we'd conquered erupted into resistance. Soldiers who had nothing left to fight for fought harder than we could have imagined. They turned their planet itself into a weapon, and they did it without mercy." He paused, glancing at the counselors, his amber eyes gleaming with something close to pity. "You think you are deciding the fate of Earth. But you're not. You are deciding the fate of your empire. And I promise you this, if you make the same mistake we did, it will not be the humans who are erased from history." For a moment, there was silence. Zarkoth lowered his head slightly, as if burdened by the memories he carried. "I will tell you what happened to my people. I will tell you of the war we started, and the horrors we unleashed upon ourselves. But if you choose to ignore my warning, then I hope you are prepared for what comes next. Because humanity will not be. With that, Zarkov stepped back, his mechanical limbs clicking softly against the floor. The room hung heavy with tension, his words lingering like a storm cloud on the horizon. The silence spoke louder than any argument could. The Rythan Empire had ruled the stars for centuries. Their fleets, sleek and bristling with weaponry, were the envy of the galaxy. Their technology, unmatched. Their dominion stretched across countless worlds, each subdued and exploited with mechanical precision. To the Rythan, Earth was no different, a backwater planet with primitive inhabitants, rich in resources yet utterly unremarkable in its defenses. Conquering it was supposed to be routine. In the grand war chambers of the Empire, high-ranking officials studied holographic projections of Earth. They mocked its cities, calling them crude assemblies of stone and steel. They laughed at humanity's disorganized governments, their lack of interstellar technology. Flesh-bound barbarians, one general sneered, the phrase drawing approving chuckles from the others. The invasion plan was simple: deploy a scouting fleet to demand Earth's surrender. Resistance, if any, would be crushed swiftly and decisively. Zarkov, then a young and ambitious commander, stood silently at the edge of the room. He'd seen the same pattern unfold on countless worlds. The Empire's arrogance was its hallmark. Subjugation was never questioned, the might of the Rythan was absolute. Yet something gnawed at him as he studied the images of Earth. There was an unfamiliar energy in those humans' eyes, a defiance that unsettled him. But Zarkov held his tongue. Questioning the Council's plans was a dangerous game, one that had ended many promising careers before they began. When the first Rythan fleet arrived in Earth's orbit, it followed the usual protocol. Their sleek, black ships descended from the heavens, casting long shadows over cities as their ultimatum was broadcast. Surrender your planet. Submit to the will of the Rythan Empire. Resistance will result in annihilation. But humanity did not surrender. The first response came in a form the Rythan had not anticipated. Instead of panicked compliance or futile protests, they were met with radio silence. Then came the human broadcasts, defiant speeches, warnings, and declarations of war. If you want our world, come and take it, one message said, the voice calm yet resolute. Zarkov, monitoring the situation from orbit, felt the first flicker of unease. This wasn't fear or submission. It was something far more dangerous: determination. The initial battles unfolded exactly as the Rythan expected. Their technology was vastly superior, and Earth's defenses crumbled under the first wave of attacks. Cities were razed. Governments fell into chaos. Yet, as the Rythan advanced, they began to encounter something new. Unlike other conquered species, the humans did not flee. They regrouped. The Rythan generals dismissed the early resistance as desperate and disorganized. Small bands of fighters ambushed patrols and ruined streets. Supplies disappeared from supposedly secured areas. Entire squadrons vanished in dense jungles and crumbling urban ruins. Zarkov, deployed to oversee ground operations, began to notice the cracks in their strategy. Human resistance wasn't random, it was deliberate, coordinated, and disturbingly effective. Guerrilla tactics slowed the Empire's advance, drawing them into prolonged skirmishes in unfamiliar terrain. Factories hidden deep within mountain ranges churned out crude but effective weaponry. Civilians became combatants, turning homes and schools into traps. Reports from the front lines painted a troubling picture. Soldiers spoke of hidden mines that crippled their vehicles, of drones cobbled together from human scrap that attacked supply lines. They described being hunted in forests and deserts, where the humans knew every inch of the land. Zarkov saw it all firsthand. He watched as an entire battalion of elite Rythan soldiers was ambushed by a handful of humans armed with nothing but explosives and makeshift weapons. It wasn't their strength or numbers that made them dangerous, it was their ingenuity. When Zarkov brought his concerns to the high command, he was dismissed outright. The generals scoffed at the idea that humans posed a real threat. "Let them have their little victories," one of them said with a smirk. "It will make their final defeat all the sweeter." Zarkov wanted to argue, but he knew his place. His warnings went unheeded. The Empire's arrogance became its undoing. Each minor victory emboldened the humans. Each loss, no matter how small, weakened the Rythan's grip. Supply chains stretched thin, and morale began to waver. Zarkov saw the fear in his soldiers' eyes, the way they hesitated to enter darkened ruins or dense forests. "The humans fought without honor," the Rythan said. "They called it cowardice." Zarkov saw it for what it was: survival. The more the Rythan pressed, the more resistance they faced. Entire cities would rise up against the invaders, armed with whatever they could find: sticks, stones, and weapons scavenged from fallen Rythan soldiers. The Empire's mighty war machines, designed for open combat, faltered in the cramped streets of human cities. They were too large, too rigid, too reliant on technology. Zarkov began to feel the first pangs of doubt. The humans weren't fighting to win, they were fighting to survive, and that made them relentless. Every loss they suffered only seemed to make them stronger, their tactics more desperate and inventive. The Rythan, for all their advanced technology, were bound by rigid strategies and a refusal to adapt. As the campaign dragged on, Zarkov could no longer deny the truth. The Empire had underestimated its enemy. They had mistaken humanity's chaos for weakness, their defiance for ignorance. The humans were not the barbarians the generals believed them to be. They were something far more dangerous, a species that refused to be conquered. And Zarkov, despite his loyalty to the Empire, couldn't shake the growing sense that they were making a mistake they could not undo. The war that had once seemed like a swift and easy conquest for the Rythan Empire was now anything but. What began as a campaign of domination had transformed into a brutal, grinding struggle against an enemy that refused to break. Humanity, dismissed as primitive and disorganized, proved to be far more resourceful and relentless than the Rythan had ever imagined. The turning point came not through sheer force but through ingenuity. Humans, despite their technological disadvantage, began to decipher Rythan technology. Engineers and scientists, often working in underground bunkers or hidden laboratories, reverse-engineered alien weapons and systems with astonishing speed. A Rythan plasma rifle would fall into human hands during a skirmish, and days later, crude but effective replicas would appear on the battlefield. Entire fleets were hacked, their automated systems turned against the Rythan by human programmers who had cracked the alien code. Zarkov vividly remembered the first major incident of sabotage. A Rythan destroyer, state-of-the-art and seemingly impenetrable, had suddenly veered off course mid-battle. Its automated defense systems turned on friendly ships, tearing through the fleet before the Empire's forces could regain control. The chaos that ensued left a scar on the Rythan's morale, and it was only the beginning. Humanity exploited the Rythan's greatest strength, their reliance on automation and centralized command systems. What had allowed the Empire to operate with precision across countless worlds became their Achilles heel. Humans infiltrated the Rythan networks, disrupting supply chains, disabling war machines, and even hijacking communications to spread disinformation. What had once been a coordinated and overwhelming assault on Earth was now fragmented and disjointed. And then there was the psychological warfare. The humans didn't just fight with weapons, they fought with words and symbols, with ideas that pierced deeper than any blade. Across occupied territories, messages of defiance were broadcast on every available channel. "We are still here," the voices would say. "We will not be broken." Even in the midst of destruction, humans found ways to spread hope, to their own people and to the Rythan soldiers forced to listen. For Zarkov, these messages were more than just propaganda. They were unnerving. He would later admit that the humans had a way of making you feel hunted, even when you were the predator. Earth's geography became their greatest ally. Dense forests, sprawling urban ruins, and labyrinthine cave systems turned into battlefields where the Rythan were outmaneuvered and outwitted at every turn. Zarkov recounted one particularly harrowing memory. His battalion had been stationed in what was supposed to be a secure zone, a vast industrial complex taken early in the war. The humans, however, knew the terrain far better than the Rythen ever could. In the dead of night, they struck. A squad of barely a dozen humans infiltrated the complex, using the shadows and their intimate knowledge of the area to their advantage. They planted explosives, disrupted communications, and ambushed patrols with surgical precision. By the time reinforcements arrived, the battalion was in ruins. Zarkov himself barely escaped, his mechanical arm damaged in the chaos. What haunted him most wasn't the destruction, it was the humans themselves. They were utterly fearless. He recalled the way they fought, their faces set with grim determination, as if they had already accepted their deaths and were fighting solely to ensure their enemy suffered for every inch of ground taken. Stories of individual heroism spread quickly among the Rythen troops, sowing fear and uncertainty. Soldiers whispered about human pilots who would crash their own ships into Rythen carriers to disable them, or operatives who infiltrated Rythen camps disguised as captives, only to destroy entire outposts from within. These were not the actions of a defeated species. They were the actions of a people who refused to kneel, no matter the cost. As the war dragged on, the Rythen Empire began to unravel. What was supposed to be a quick and efficient campaign turned into a prolonged nightmare. The cost of maintaining the invasion became unsustainable. Supply lines stretched thin across light years, leaving troops under-equipped and demoralized. Entire fleets were diverted from other fronts to deal with the human problem, leaving the Empire vulnerable elsewhere. For Zarkov, the realization came slowly but unmistakably. The humans were not fighting for territory or power. They were not fighting for glory or riches. They were fighting for survival. And that made them unstoppable in a way the Rythen could not comprehend. The Empire's greed had brought them to Earth, but it was no match for humanity's desperation and will to endure. The once mighty Rythen war machine began to falter, piece by piece. Zarkov watched as his comrades, once so confident in their superiority, began to break under the strain. Fear and doubt crept into their ranks. For every city the Rythen took, they lost ships, soldiers, and resources they could not replace. Zarkov could see the writing on the wall, even if the Empire's leaders refused to acknowledge it. Humanity was turning the tide, not through overwhelming force, but through sheer determination and brilliance. They adapted to every new tactic, countered every new weapon. And they did it with a tenacity that shook the very foundations of the Rythen Empire. For Zarkov, one moment stood out above all others. It was a simple broadcast intercepted from Earth, a human soldier standing amidst rubble, her uniform torn and her face bloodied, staring directly into the camera. "You will never own this planet," she said, her voice steady. "We are humanity. And we do not surrender." Those words echoed in his mind, long after the transmission ended. In that moment, Zarkov understood the truth. The Rythen Empire had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated their enemy. And now, they were paying the price. The war reached its breaking point in Earth's orbit. The Rythen fleet, once a symbol of invincibility, now found itself surrounded. The humans, battered but unyielding, had spent months preparing for this moment. Zarkov was stationed aboard one of the Empire's flagships, observing what he assumed would be the final strike to crush the resistance. Yet even he could feel the tension in the air. The humans had proven themselves unpredictable time and again, and he couldn't shake the sense that something unprecedented was about to happen. The humans' attack began with a coordinated assault, utilizing a combination of stolen Rythen technology and their own makeshift creations. Repurposed Rythen drones, now under human control, swarmed the Empire's ships, targeting weak points with frightening accuracy. At first, the Rythen commanders dismissed the assault as another desperate gambit, but as explosions rippled through the fleet, it became clear that this was no mere skirmish. The humans had managed to weaponize their ingenuity in ways the Rythen couldn't have anticipated. They overloaded power grids, detonated improvised electromagnetic pulses, and jammed communication lines, leaving the fleet in disarray. Zarkov watched in disbelief as human fighters, smaller, slower, but devastatingly effective, began weaving through the chaos, striking precisely where it hurt most. The pivotal moment came when the humans revealed their trump card, a colossal, repurposed Rythan cruiser. It had been captured early in the war, though the Rythan had assumed it was destroyed in combat. Instead, the humans had been secretly modifying it, turning it into a weapon of unimaginable power. With its shields strengthened and its weapons recalibrated, the ship emerged from Earth's atmosphere, leading the assault against the Empire's flagship. The battle was unlike anything Zarkov had ever witnessed. The humans' determination was palpable, their tactics bold to the point of madness. They used their own lives as leverage, crashing ships into critical points on Rythan vessels, their sacrifices sending shockwaves through the fleet. The flagship itself, the pride of the Rythan Navy, became the ultimate target. Zarkov could feel the shudder of impacts as the humans pressed their assault. Alarms blared, and chaos erupted among the crew. In a final, desperate maneuver, the human cruiser rammed into the flagship, detonating its payload in a blinding explosion. Zarkov remembered the sound, the deafening roar of destruction, followed by an eerie silence. The flagship was crippled, its once mighty form now a burning wreck. The remaining Rythan ships, leaderless and in disarray, had no choice but to retreat. The Empire's humiliation was complete. For the first time in its long history, the Rythan had been defeated by a species they had deemed inferior. Zarkov, injured and shaken, was among the survivors who limped back to the Empire's homeworld. The journey home was a somber one, the weight of failure pressing heavily on every soldier's shoulders. When Zarkov returned, he found an empire in turmoil. The war had drained their resources, shattered their morale, and exposed the arrogance of their leadership. The propaganda that once celebrated the Empire's invincibility now rang hollow. Citizens demanded answers. Soldiers, scarred from battle, questioned the wisdom of their leaders. Zarkov himself, once a loyal servant of the Empire, found his faith irreparably shaken. He had lost comrades, friends who had believed in the Empire's cause. He had lost limbs, replaced by cold, unfeeling machinery that served as a constant reminder of the horrors he had witnessed. But most of all, he had lost his certainty. The humans had shown him a truth that the Empire had long ignored: might alone does not guarantee victory. In the quiet of his recovery, Zarkov reflected on what he had learned. Humanity, he realized, was unlike any enemy the Empire had ever faced. They did not fight for conquest or glory. They fought because they had no other choice. They fought because their very existence was at stake. And that made them unstoppable. When Zarkov addressed the Galactic Council, his voice carried the weight of his experiences. Humans, he said, his tone grave, taught me one thing: when they have nothing left to lose, they become unstoppable. He recounted the desperation in their eyes, the ingenuity in their tactics, and the unyielding spirit that had brought the mighty Rythan Empire to its knees. He warned the Council of the dangers of underestimating humanity. They were not a species to provoke lightly. They had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they could adapt, endure, and ultimately triumph. Zarkov's warning was clear: to start a war with humans was to invite disaster, not just for an empire, but for the galaxy itself. As he concluded, Zarkov glanced around the chamber, his mechanical limbs a silent testament to the price of arrogance. "Learn from our mistakes," he said. "Do not repeat them. Humanity may seem fragile, but they are anything but. They are a force that will not be conquered." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the council like a storm cloud. Zarkov's story was not just a tale of defeat, it was a lesson, one that the galaxy could not afford to ignore. The council chamber was filled with tension, the air heavy with unease as Zarkov's tale came to an end. For a moment, there was silence, the weight of his words sinking in. Then, as expected, the debate began. Some council members, seated in their gilded thrones, scoffed openly at Zarkov's warning. "This is fearmongering," one declared, their voice dripping with disdain. "You exaggerate the capabilities of these humans. They are a primitive species, barely unified and confined to their tiny world." We are the Galactic Empire, stewards of countless systems and civilizations. How could they possibly threaten us? Others, however, were visibly shaken. Zarkov noticed the flicker of doubt in their eyes, the uncertainty that had begun to take root. Primitive, yes, one counselor admitted cautiously. But if what Zarkov says is true, their ingenuity and resolve make them far more dangerous than we assume. The Rythan thought the same as we do now, and look at the cost they paid. The argument raged on, a clash of pride against prudence. Some saw humanity as an opportunity, a resource to be exploited, a species to dominate. Others saw them as a risk too great to take lightly. Zarkov watched in silence, his mechanical hand clenching unconsciously. These were the same attitudes he had witnessed in the Rythan Empire before the war, and he knew where they led. When the noise grew unbearable, Zarkov rose from his seat. The chamber fell silent as his imposing figure loomed over the council. "Enough," he said, his voice low but firm. "You sit here debating humanity as if they are a simple equation to be solved. But they are not. They are chaos incarnate, bound together by the will to survive and the capacity to adapt." He paused, scanning the room. "You think yourselves invincible, just as my people did. You believe that your fleets, your technology, your numbers, will protect you. But you are wrong. If you fight them, you may win battles. But you will lose the war, and yourselves." The chamber grew still, Zarkov's words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. He continued, his voice tinged with urgency. "You do not need to make them your enemies. There are other paths: diplomacy, trade, alliances. Humanity is more than just their resilience, they are capable of great creation as well as destruction. Engage with them as equals, not as prey." He leaned forward slightly, his mechanical arm gleaming in the council's light. "But if you choose war, understand this, you will not face a species that surrenders. You will face a species that fights until there is nothing left to give. And in doing so, they will take everything from you." The council sat in stunned silence, some visibly grappling with his words, others staring stubbornly ahead. Zarkov sighed inwardly, knowing that many still didn't understand. Yet he had said his piece, and the decision was no longer his to make. As the session drew to a close, Zarkov found himself reflecting on humanity's legacy. Stories of their defiance and ingenuity had already begun to spread across the galaxy. Tales of their triumph against the Rythan, how they had turned weakness into strength, and desperation into victory, had reached far-flung systems. To many, they were an inspiration. To others, they were a warning. Zarkov thought back to the faces of those humans he had encountered. They were imperfect, undeniably so. They fought among themselves, squandered their resources, and often made decisions driven by emotion rather than reason. But it was precisely those imperfections that made them so dangerous. Their unpredictability, their willingness to sacrifice everything for what they believed in, those were traits no empire, no matter how vast, could counter. He recalled the human soldier's words from the broadcast during the war, "We are humanity. And we do not surrender." That defiance, that unshakable spirit, was what made them unique. They were not conquerors by nature, but when backed into a corner, they became something unstoppable. As the council adjourned, Zarkov lingered for a moment, watching the representatives file out. Some whispered amongst themselves, others avoided his gaze entirely. The debate would continue, of that he was certain. Whether they chose to heed his warning or ignore it, he could not say. Walking out of the chamber, Zarkov felt the weight of his past settle heavily on his shoulders. He had seen too much, lost too much, to feel hope for the Galactic Empire's future. Yet he knew one thing with absolute certainty: humanity was not to be underestimated. As he stepped into the shadowy corridors, Zarkov's voice echoed in his mind, words he had spoken moments before, but now carried with them a sense of finality. "Beware humanity, for they are the storm you cannot weather." The council had yet to decide, but Zarkov knew the truth. If the Galactic Empire chose war, they would learn the lesson the Rythan Empire had learned, too late, and at too great a cost. And humanity, battered but unbroken, would endure. They always did.